Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in for this next edition of the Federalist Files. We're going to be going over Federalist number 16 today. It's titled, "The Same Subject Continued the Inefficiency of the Present Confederation to Preserve the Union," written by Alexander Hamilton, December 4th, 1787. Topics include people holding the power, and the Constitution must reach out to the people rather than the state governments. Now, this is a topic that was in the last one that kind of much more of an introduction to this paper here. The topic of these federal government powers reaching out to the citizens rather than the state governments, because the state government really has the discretion on whether they're going to oblige by the rules or not, or constitute these mandates from a federal government. Now, in this paper, Hamilton begins by condemning the current system and calling it the parent of anarchy. And he states, and I quote, "It has been seen that delinquencies in the members of the Union are its natural and necessary offspring, and that whenever they happen, the only constitutional remedy is force, and the immediate effect of the use of it, civil war." End quote. So, in other words, that means currently, because we do not have the instilled court system that is needed, delinquencies by the members of the Union, meaning the state governments, if they decide to not abide by the rules or the laws of the federal Constitution. So whenever I say or I state the Constitution, I always mean the federal, usually, but each individual state has their own Constitution as well. Like I said in earlier papers, as long as the federal government or as long as the state governments represent a republic, then it is considered a legal or a legal or an acceptable form of government for our federal Constitution. The federal Constitution lays out that the form of government in the states has to be a republic form of government, as in it has representatives like state legislatures, which I've mentioned before. I think the New Jersey state legislature has something like 250 members. Has, a governor, just like a executive magistrate, like a president. It also has a court system as well. So here what he's saying is, essentially, delinquencies by these members at this point, there really is not a setup for a federal court system, so there's no way to really handle it. And the only way in which to do it right now is force, which is not good. And they need to figure out a way to handle it in a better manner. Now, he continues, and I quote, "If there should not be a large army constantly at the disposal of the national government, it would either not be able to employ force at all, or when this could be done, it would amount to a war between different parts of the Confederacy concerning the infractions of a league in which the strongest combination would be most likely to prevail, whether it consisted of those who supported or of those who resisted the general authority," end quote. So here, really, what he's saying is that if you don't have a federal army, if you don't have the national military, what will end up happening is people that are delinquent or not following the rules, state governments that aren't doing that, you're going to have groups of other states that get together and fight or lash out towards those other states, and then pretty much just a giant civil war, and whoever has the strongest combination in terms of men, at that time there wasn't really much innovation with arms. Everything was pretty much musket driven. Semi-automatic rifles came, I want to say, in the early 1900s, along with like the 1911. If I had to really guess. Other than that, they had repeaters. But even, at that time in the 1780s, it was straight up muskets until the Wild West times, when they started to get the repeaters or the lever action rifles. Now, he continues on this point, and he says, "Independent of this motive of sympathy, if a large and influential state should happen to be the aggressing number, it would commonly have weight enough with its members to win over some of them as associates to its cause. Specious arguments of danger to the common liberty could easily be contrived. Plausible excuses for the deficiencies of the party could, without difficulty, be invented to alarm the apprehensions, inflame the passions, and conciliate the goodwill even of those states which were not chargeable with any violation or omission of duty. End quote. So he's pretty much saying the larger and the more influential states can legit at any moment for the self-aggrandizement of their governor or their government officials can go after any state for any reason with no type of chargeable violation or omission of duty. If there was, no federal system or federal military setup to combat that happening. It's just a bunch this paper in general talks about a little factional stuff. Then the really important stuff is when Hamilton gets to the way in which the federal Constitution should be read and the way in which the overreach that it has, or rather the reach. Really the reach that it actually has. When you deploy that federal Constitution, how far it goes. He wants it to. What he's saying is he wants it to go to the people, and the Articles of Confederation at that time only really went to the state governments, and then the state governments would pick or choose what they would want to follow. So if there's certain laws related to taxation, they would choose if they really wanted to actually instill those laws and those policies themselves. A lot of them wouldn't do it, which is the reason now for the proposed constitution, because these states did not really care for any of the Articles of Confederation, any of the provisions that were in it, and they wanted to be able to make them liable, essentially, which is why they came out with this new federal constitution. So Hamilton believed that under the current system, delinquencies committed by states would and could be enforced by the use of force. The immediate effect of this use of force would be a civil war, which he contends, and I quote, "When the sword is once drawn, the passions of men observe no bounds of moderation," end quote. So essentially he's just saying, once war starts, it doesn't really end until there's a victor. There is no such thing as a moderation until one side beats the other side. And he continues on this front, stating, and I quote, "The first war of this kind would probably terminate in a dissolution of the Union," end quote. Which actually, he's wrong, because we had our Civil War and we are still here. We are still standing strong. So, but he's saying, this first, any type of civil war, it'll probably terminate the Union. It will no longer stand. Now, Hamilton evaluates that with a federal system instilled, delinquent states wouldn't be attacked by Union states, but rather, and I quote, "they would always be more ready to pursue the milder course of putting themselves upon an equal footing with the delinquent members by an imitation of their example, and the guilt of all would thus become the security of all," end quote. So saying if you're not part of the federal system, or let's say you're outside the federal system, because the proposed constitution was you needed 9 of the 13 states to adopt. So once those 9 of those 13 states adopt, those 9 states are part of the Union, and there's still 4 that are outside of the Union. And he said that these, and if they ended up getting into the Union, whatever delinquencies, whatever things they did wrong, they wouldn't be enforced by the use of force. They would be pushed through a court system, and then, everyone having a little bit of skin in the game, all these other states would eventually move these states that are committing these delinquencies into a manner where they are abiding by the rules. And these, and it is important, in the Union, everyone should be, and this is something that he gets to later. He starts to talk about federal, because the dissenters are really worried about the federal government encroaching on their power, and then he makes the argument that the state governments really actually, they hold much more power than the federal, because at the end of the day, if the federal government has some sort of rule, the state governments could just decide not, and especially at this point, the state governments can decide just not to follow the rule or the law. Now they really have to, but still we have a lot of things that aren't technically followed from a federal, for example, sanctuary cities. Federally, there is no support for state governments having their those sanctuary cities at all. The federal constitution lays out the way in which citizenship and getting citizenship works, and if you don't have citizenship, you are an illegal alien. It's all in law in our country, but that's something that sanctuary cities somehow, I guess, are overlooked by our Supreme Courts when they really shouldn't be. Because then, if you consider it a sanctuary city at that point, you are almost a sovereignty within a sovereignty. You are a sovereignty within a state, and you are not abiding by federal law. So it really is it is unconstitutional having these sanctuary cities, because it gives the state government just completely encroaches upon the federal government's power, where they differentiate and they don't really care whether or not people are citizens. In some states, they're trying to, I know Jersey's trying to do it, where they're trying to make illegal aliens able to vote, which really doesn't vote in state elections. They wouldn't be able to vote in federal elections, because that would be completely, I don't know how a Supreme Court justice would be able to pass, a Supreme Court would be able to pass that through. And the only reason they do this, they want illegal aliens to vote, it really does not have anything to actually do with caring about their vote or valuing their vote. It's only about political power. It's about gaining seats. The same thing with DACA. If you look, and then on top of that, like I've explained, having open border policy is only good for the really rich guys. That is legitimately, and I think Bernie Sanders himself has said it. You could say whatever you want about Bernie Sanders, but that guy has been about the same for the last 30 or 40 years. He has been openly a socialist, which is actually a little bit more enlightening than a lot of these other characters. There was a video of Obama that recently came out the other day when they asked him about socialism. I think it was a Good Luck America interview. And he was saying, he didn't even disavow socialism. He was just saying they got to kind of use a different word to explain socialism, because, using that exact word has negative connotations because the history of America. And there was this interview I was actually watching, and I didn't even know this, but there's this interview. It was on Joe Rogan's podcast. I think the guy's name was John Mackey. He is the CEO of Whole Foods. And he said, socialism has been tried 45 times in the last 100 years. In the last century, it's been tried 45 times. It has not successfully been done once, which I thought was very interesting. And our system that we have has been tried. Our specific system that we set the free markets with our court system, our executive, these three branches of government with these set powers, has never been done before. It's never been tried. It's been tried here, and it's been successful the one time it was tried. So. Now, like I said, that is a Koch brothers policy, and the reason that Bernie Sanders would say, that's a Koch brothers policy, because even Bernie Sanders, he understands if you're going to have a social welfare system or a free college education, a free healthcare system, you need to have very tight borders, and he's somebody that actually admits that, which really sets him aside from the rest of the Democrat Party, because the Democrat Party is just looking for votes, and that's the only reason why they want an open borders policy, or they want to act like they care but not really do anything about it, and then just keep passing some sort of a DACA legislation to permanently make people citizens that are not citizens. Or DACA is not even really particularly, that's more situations that are, those are much more gray area. There's actual arguments that you can make for both sides. DACA, because they were brought here and they were born here. That's the whole birthright citizenship question. It falls under the jurisdiction thereof clause in the Constitution. That one people fight over often. The two different arguments is, one is, they were under the jurisdiction thereof when they were born here, meaning like they were born in America. But then the other argument is the jurisdiction thereof has nothing to do with geography. It is what government it is that you are under, or what government is accountable for you, or you are accounted for. What government are you signed up for? It's like going to... what's the best way to explain it? It's like going to the retro fitness gym when you're really a member of the Planet Fitness gym, and you're going to try to pay the same membership fees at the retro fitness when you're really a Planet Fitness member. I guess that's the best way I could try to explain it. So Hamilton explains the insurmountable difficulty of ascertaining when force should be employed as it relates to delinquency and contributions, which meaning tax revenue. Due to either inability or obviation, he states, and I quote, "It is easy to see that this problem alone, as often as it should occur, would open a wide field for the exercise of factious views, of partiality, and of oppression in the majority that happen to prevail in the National Council." So Hamilton lays out the remedy to this conflict is a national constitution that instills a national army, thus mitigating those threats of use of power from states and factions. Just to go back on my point, I didn't even finish my point. I just realized this, but the reason that Bernie Sanders says it's a Koch brothers policy having these open borders is because it lowers the evaluation of your pay rate, or rather your the minimum wage, or just your wage. It lowers wages when you have more and more people, more available labor in the country. It lowers the amount that they can pay you. So like the Koch brothers, for example, they're very rich. They own a bunch of different entities. If they are looking to get, let's say they own some sort of gas station, and they're looking to get people to pump gas, and it is considered a manual labor job, and it's not a job that really, it's an unskilled labor job, so there's no specific skills that are needed. It's not like driving with a Class A. It's not like doing some sort of construction, or it's not like doing if you need the skills for that construction, or like an electrician, you can't just have any random person that has a basic education walk in there and figure out how to be an electrician. It is a difficult job. It is intricate. It is complicated. It's not something you just walk right into. So a lot of these jobs that are available, and people hold these people that hold these jobs, so the lower income individuals that hold these jobs are put in jeopardy by open border policy. And this is something that's known. That's why it's kind of weird that the Democrat Party pushes it, because a lot of their voter base is affected by this. The Hispanic and the Black communities are most affected by illegal immigration, because the people come into their communities and pretty much take their jobs from them. And it lowers their wage, so they either get laid off or they lower how much they're making because of this policy. And also along with that is, he said it's a Koch brothers policy, because if you have open borders and you have free education in terms of college, and you also have free health care, it's a system where now you're going to have an outrageous amount of people coming to your country just to gain some of the social welfare state, just so they can gain that free health care. And then once you have a free healthcare system, people right now, what keeps people from going, it's kind of nice not having one to begin with, going through insurance or having a copay, because for very small injuries that are trivial, people don't go to the doctor when they really shouldn't be going to the doctor. But when you have free healthcare straight across the board, everyone will be going to the doctor all of the time. Therefore, they now have to, they have to cut time down, and these lines are going to be insane. And then the payout is an additional through Obamacare or through some sort of socialized medicine program. It would be 40% less we're paying into hospitals, as well as doctors and nurses. So people aren't going to go and get the same education, go to school for 8 years, or even go to be a nurse if they're going to get paid 40% less of what they're getting paid now. Like nurses, where I used to work at the hospital that I used to work at, nurses, they made something like $40 an hour. If you're telling a nurse now they're going to have to take a pay cut where they only make like $22-23 an hour, none of them are going to go to school for. Why would you go to school for nursing for 4 years when you can go pick up a job right out of high school and then eventually work your way up to, like say $30 an hour? Because I know there's a lot of places that you don't even need a high school degree, manual labor kind of things, where you're making more than $23 an hour once you max pay. So that's really why having open border policy does not work with a social welfare system, and Bernie Sanders at least is aware of that, because he's seen these different socialist programs in different countries, and they go over it in, I think it's Michael Moore's like Capitalism: A Love Story. He has it in his little documentary, and he talks about healthcare and he makes it like it's so great. But then if you want to look at the average waiting time in Canada or Great Britain to see a specialist, meaning if you have this weird thing on your neck that you want your dermatologist to check out, and then you go to the doctor, you get your referral, which I'm not a huge fan of the whole referral system. I just think it's another way to charge your insurance company. I personally am not a big fan of that, and then it also builds up more and more lines. That's something they need to figure out. That's like, but that here's the thing with that. That is a regulation. They have these regulations set up, so the government screwed that up. That's a government system. The whole getting a going to your primary care physician and then having them fill out a prescription to go see somebody, or it's and then that's another thing is if you want certain drugs or certain medication, you have to go see your primary care. Usually they don't just fill you a prescription and let you go. So you need that referral when you really shouldn't. If you have, let's say, some sort, I mean, I have family members that have like a lot of, weird skin tags that just pop up out of nowhere randomly. And if they want to go see the dermatologist every single time they go to see they have to go to their primary care physician. It's just ridiculous that you even need to do that. You shouldn't have to do that. That's another thing too, is when you're sick and you get sick during the same time every single year in the beginning of winter, and it's always a sinus infection, and you have a sinus infection because you've been through it so many times and you've experienced it probably 20 times in your life, and you have to go to the doctor to get that prescription medication. And that prescription medication isn't a painkiller. It's not something that's really detrimental to your health or something that you could be hooked on. It does not have those type of properties to it. It's just a simple antibiotic medication. You still need to go to the doctor to get a prescription. So that's just another way to charge your insurance. I think a lot of that stuff is regulated into the government, because I bet you, like myself, I would pay the same amount into my health care if I didn't have to go every single time. If I didn't have to go every single time I knew what I had. And I mean, knock on wood, but the last year or so, I really haven't even been sick. So you're sitting there paying into a program, and then every single time you have any issue, you have to then go to the doctor, get a referral, get a prescription, rather than just knowing what you have and going and filling the prescription yourself. And that's another way to double charge your insurance. I think it's a lot of regulation in the system. That might actually be something that is that may be lobbied. I'm not exactly sure, particularly with health insurance, if they want to be charged more, or if these physicians want to charge the health insurance more to make money. But I don't think that would be the case from a physician side, just because they have so many patients that they can barely even get to. And that's another thing. It has to be, their time is so limited when they see you now because of that. And that's what the system would be under a socialist system. When you have so many people waiting in that waiting room, you barely even get to see the doctor. It would be so quick, because then they would have to, I don't remember the name of the word, but I heard Ben Shapiro one time explain it, that it would have to be, since it's not a structure of money in paying for your health care, they would have to kind of find a way in which to cut it around time. One of these days I'll explain it. I'll explain it one of these days. But that's just me rambling on about random stuff. So Hamilton then explains Hamilton's remedy. Yeah, I went through that. So Hamilton answers contentions that a national military will lead to military despotism. With the amount of funding available, Hamilton urges that this is not a pragmatic argument. So this is the most interesting part, I think, about the papers. This last half here is definitely the most interesting part. So he states, and I quote, "It seems to require no pains to prove that the states ought not to prefer a national constitution which could only be kept in motion by the instrumentality of a large army continually on foot to execute the ordinary requisitions or decrees of the government, and yet this is the plain alternative involved by those who wish to deny it to the power of extending its operations to individuals. Such a scheme, if practicable at all, would instantly degenerate into a military despotism, but it will be found in every light impracticable." So he answers the contentions of this. So pretty much what's being said here is that they're saying there's going to be this large army or this military to enforce every single constitutional mandate, and anyone that denies it will be, thrown in prison, thrown pretty much a police state, essentially, kind of almost like things we have going on right now with these COVID lockdowns, where you're seeing more and more videos come out of civil disobedience, where people are just done with the government at this point. It's either they go out of business or they continue to keep their business open and at least attempt to keep it afloat. I've seen different. I mean, there's that video of that one guy. There's all these different videos, and people are getting. Oh, there's a sting. I mean, I read about a sting operation in New York, which is pretty pathetic and sad from the cops that are in New York. The fact that you guys, it was something like an officer walked into a place he wanted to see. He walked into some sort of restaurant or bar and see if they would serve him like a burger, and they did, and then apparently they arrested the guy, and like it was pretty much a sting operation, which is just ridiculous that this is what you guys are doing at this point. Like, how about you guys actually go enforce the law in your big city that's been lit on fire and ablaze the last 4 or 5 months during this whole BLM thing, and Antifa has been just running your city straight into the end, and then your cops are like nowhere to be found. And you got guys, I hate to be hard on cops, but it has to get to a point where someone's got to, I understand your governor and your mayor's telling you now to uphold the law, but it has to get to a point where somebody upholds the law. Somebody's got to do something. Or else then, like I said, you get the Kyle Rittenhouse, you get the kid that's 17 years old that shows up with an AR-15 ready to defend the city. And that's what's going to happen. That's not a one-time occurrence. That's not like an anomaly. That will happen. That's going to continue. That will start happening in a higher magnitude. It'll be magnified. That will happen more and more. The less and less police are policing, and the more the government is having these capricious mandates. Capricious meaning inconsistent, where one person, it applies to one person or it applies to a business, but then it doesn't apply to people that are outside just acting wild and acting crazy. So Hamilton answers these contentions that a national army will lead to a military despotism. With the amount of funding available, Hamilton urges that this is not a practical argument. And he states, and I quote, "The resources of the Union would not be equal to the maintenance of an army considerable enough to confine the larger states within the limits of their duty, nor would the means ever be furnished of forming such an army in the first instance," end quote. So here what he's saying pretty much is we'll never be able to bring in the kind of military that they're talking about in terms of the amount of revenue that we bring in. We just do not have enough money in the purse or in the bank to pay for a giant military like that. It's not possible. And he's right, because America at this time was a developing nation. There really is no possible way that could have been done, even if they wanted to do it. And then he continues, and I quote, "Even in those confederacies which have been composed of members smaller than many of our counties, the principle of legislation for sovereign states supported by military coercion has never been found effectual. It has rarely been attempted to be employed but against the weaker members, and in most instances attempts to coerce the refractory and disobedient have been the signals of bloody wars in which one half of the Confederacy has displayed its banners against the other half," end quote. Pretty much just meaning when you try to make a military despotism, you're gonna get bloody wars because people are not going to let you take them over. They yearn for freedom naturally and liberty, and then when this happens, then you're gonna get other states fighting other states. Now Hamilton next he alludes to the importance of having a federal government where the powers extend its agency to the citizens rather than the state government. So this is probably the most important part of the paper right here. This is the meat and potatoes. I'm going to have some heavy quotes. It's going to be long. So this one begins here, and I quote, "The result of these observations to an intelligent mind must be clearly this, that if it be possible at any rate to construct a federal government capable of regulating the common common concerns and preserving the general tranquility. It must be founded as to the objects committed to its care upon the reverse of the principle contended for by the opponents of the proposed Constitution. It must carry its agency to the persons of the citizens. It must stand in need of no intermediate legislations, but must itself be empowered to employ the arm of the ordinary magistrate to execute its own resolutions. The majesty of the national authority must be manifested through the medium of the courts of justice. The government of the Union, like that of each state, must be able to address itself immediately to the hopes and fears of individuals, and to attract to its support those passions which have the strongest influence upon the human heart. It must, in short, possess all the means and have a right to resort to all methods of executing the powers with which it is entrusted that are possessed and exercised by the government of the particular states, end quote. So here, what he's saying, the federal government should have the power the power should reach out to the people rather than the individual state governments, because they need to be able to, the best way to aid the citizens. The way in which they looked at the federal government at this point was because at this point, the federal government pretty much was useless. He was looking at any way in which it can help the citizen in terms of national defense, helping to facilitate commerce through building roads, the court system, justice system, because there was fights over land at that time. Even if somebody stole your stuff, there was really no way to put them through a court system at that time. That's pretty serious. Those are some pretty serious concerns there. Now, more importantly, movements of a national military on citizens and states would have to be approved by a president and a Congress, as well as the Supreme Court. So really, you wouldn't be able to make moves on citizens, declare what you call, I guess, a martial law. Exactly. Hamilton explains the usurpations differing between the federal government and the state government and the safeguards against them. So here he's going to start, I think it's with he's going to start with the federal government. So he's going to explain in a system where the federal government tries to encroach on the state government and the people exactly what the recourse is and what the safeguard is. So he states, and I quote, "To this reasoning it may perhaps be objected that if any state should be disaffected to the authority of the Union, it could at any time obstruct the execution of its laws, and bring the matter to the same issue of force, with the necessity of which the opposite scheme is reproached. The plausibility of this objection will vanish the moment we advert to the essential difference between a mere noncompliance and a direct and active resistance. If the interposition of the state legislatures be necessary to give effect to a measure of the Union, they have only not to act or to act evasively, and the measure is defeated." Now, he's pretty much saying, if the federal government wants to go through with something that is unconstitutional or something that invades the rights of the people, there could be a non-compliance by state government, active resistance. They can just choose not to act, which they kind of have this when you go to the House of Representatives and the Senate, when you go to vote and you vote as present. Voting as present pretty much is pretty much like saying a soft no or a nothing. I'm just saying nothing to it, but it isn't a yay. When they go to vote and they say, "Are you in favor of this law or this?" they say yay, as in yes, or they say nay, as in no, or they say present, as in no, but a soft no. It's like a weird political game where if you don't, I'm trying to think. Articles of impeachment. I'm trying to think if Tulsi Gabbard had a present. I don't remember which article of impeachment it was, but she had a present call on one of them because she didn't agree with, I think it was the obstruction of Congress in the impeachment hearing. The obstruction of Congress isn't a real, it's not a real law. There's no real violation there. You can't really impeach somebody on something. Like if they went to impeach him on that and ended up going through the Senate, I think then after that it would have to go through the Supreme Court to figure out whether or not it's a legal precedent to actually impeach over obstruction of Congress. I was just a BS one that the Congress members like to kind of show and flex their muscle and their power. These government elected officials are truly remarkable. They sit up there on their committees and their boards, And if you don't call them by congressman or congresswoman, they take it to serious offense and they get angry at you and they yell at you. I've seen it many times where they try to pull their rank and pull their power and they're snarky about it. Well, they'll be like, actually, that's congressman or that's congresswoman. And they get very nasty and rude. It was almost like Kamala Harris when she was debating Mike Pence and she kept going, "Excuse me, I'm talking. Excuse me, I'm talking." She did that over and over again, and it was it was not relatable, and it did not work out for her in her favor. It made her look super snarky and rude and nasty, and almost like that library lady that tells everybody shh the whole time that you're in the library, even when you're whispering to each other already. That's what she seemed like when she was doing that. Now, so next, what he does is he's going to explain the state government usurpation. So next, Hamilton states, and I quote, "But if the execution of the laws of the national government should not require the intervention of the state legislatures, if they were to pass into immediate operation upon the citizens themselves, the particular governments could not interrupt their progress without an open and violent exertion of an unconstitutional power. No omissions nor evasions would answer the end. They would be obliged to act, and in such a manner as would leave no doubt that they had encroached on the national rights. An experiment of this nature would always be hazardous in the face of a constitution in any degree competent to its own defense, and of a people enlightened enough to distinguish between a legal exercise and an illegal usurpation of authority. The success of it would require not merely a factious majority in the legislature, but the concurrence of the courts of justice and of the body of the people. If the judges were not embarked in a conspiracy with the legislature, they would pronounce the resolutions of such a majority to be contrary to the supreme law of the land, unconstitutional and void. If the people were not tainted with the spirit of their state representatives, they, as the natural guardians of the Constitution, would throw their weight into the national scale and give it a decided preponderancy in the contest. Attempts of this kind would not often be made with levity or rashness, because they would seldom be made without danger to the authors, unless in cases of tyrannical exercise of the federal authority." End quote. So here he goes through many things. He talks about pretty much all the safeguards that are necessary in our system, in our Constitution, that afford the people really extra protections and extra rights because of these safeguards. So he says first the people, he calls the state representatives the natural guardians of the Constitution, and then he also mentions that the people are as well the reason. I think he says it maybe later. He talks about the people. But the state representatives are supposed to be the natural guardians of the Constitution, meaning the House of Representative members, as well as you could throw the senators in there as well. But more the representative. I mean, now you can really throw the senators in there because the senators are elected kind of the same way that the state representatives are. But, years ago, like I said, the whole system was the state legislators picked the senator, so they would be more representative of the state government. But now, considering it is it is a democratic voting process now, in terms of electing your representatives of the House as well as your senators. So they're both protectors, as well as the court system. The court system is supposed to really be fully have a full oath to the Constitution and the people. And these all work as checks on the authority of the federal government. And usurpations will also not be tolerated by state legislatures as well. So that's really what he's saying in this one, is that the state legislature is the only way in which they can try to obviate the Constitution would be some sort of unconstitutional power or violent exertion, which is something that we're seeing some unconstitutional power right now being practiced in our states. I don't know. And we've seen the Supreme Court come in a couple cases. They came in New York, and then I think I read another case just the other day. They came in another case as well, saying that these mandates are unconstitutional. But they're not really saying they're unconstitutional because of First Amendment reasons. They're saying they're unconstitutional because the way in which they're applying the law to different places, it does not, under the 14th Amendment, it wouldn't be legal to begin with, is that the law somehow is different for one person than it is the other, or one business than it is the other, when it really shouldn't be that way, essentially. But it also should be a First Amendment argument, especially when it's religious institutions, more than anything, that are not being protected the same way as like the Target or the Walmart is, which I've mentioned. We've talked about it in the last couple of videos, the current event videos. Now, he states, Hamilton, the success of it would require not merely a factious majority in the legislature, but the concurrence of the court system and the body of the people. End quote. So he's talking about if the state governments wanted to usurp the power of the federal governments, because there were certain rights that were afforded by the federal constitution. If the state governments wanted to take away those rights, like they currently, I mean, everything I read, a lot of this stuff, it starts to be relative to what's going on right now. And our representatives the problem is this has become a bipartisan. The Constitution now, in this point in time in our history in modern day, has become a bipartisan issue, where the things that were in between the Constitution or outside the context of the Constitution, kind of gray areas, is the best way that I can characterize it. Those were, years ago, those were much more partisan, whereas now its basic core values in your Constitution are now considered partisan, where, you know, you have one party that does not take the side of the Constitution at all, doesn't really care, and then you have the other party that somewhat defends the Constitution, but they do it in such a soft manner. They really do. It's like, it's sad. I mean, some people are strong on it, and then some other people, it's like, it's almost like the First Amendment doesn't matter anymore. The first and the second are probably the most important ones. It's why I cite them all the time. The most important ones, because they both protect each other. Second Amendment protects freedom of establishment of religion, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of press, all that. It protects all of it. And the First Amendment also helps to protect the Second Amendment as well, because the First Amendment really protects all of them. Just by you being able to speak freely should help, you know, build up support and foundation behind whatever your argument is in favor of a constitution. It's the best way for political discourse, and just discourse in general. It's the best way, having arguments, and, you know, at the dinner table or what have you. Those are the best ways to solve things. Now, Hamilton, along with the other writers of the Constitution, believed in the founding philosophy of self-government, and they felt like the people at large held the power. Like I said, it says, the body of the people. So, and concurrence of the court system, all that. So you would really need to overthrow all of our institutions. I mean, right now, I would like to, I think all of our institutions are kind of in some sort of jeopardy. Our Supreme Court system, we only have a 5-4 majority. It is not a 6-3 like the media likes to say, because John Roberts is a turncoat. He is a lefty. Whatever the media tells him to do, he generally votes that way. Or he's like that guy almost that votes... It's like the guy that bets on the team or jumps on the bandwagon at the end of the season, the football season, because that team's going to win the Super Bowl and he knows it. He's like that. He's like that person. He does either that or he just, however the media tells him to vote. He's afraid of the media. He's afraid of everything. He's the most milquetoasty person in the world. He really does not have any type of conviction. And, you know, you got 9 people making a lot of decisions for a lot of people in our country, which is a real problem that you have people like that. So it's a 5-4 majority. It's a very slight, small conservative majority. And then you've also have people that are in that 5 number that have turned around and they have abandoned certain conservative values on certain issues. So you have some people that are solid, like Alito, Sam Alito, Clarence Thomas, and then Amy Coney Barrett we've yet to see, but it seems like she's going to be very solid considering her relationship with the late Antonin Scalia, who was probably one of the most conservative court justices we've ever had, or the most textualist in terms of he derives almost every thought or every opinion that he has off the Constitution, and that's the way it seems like that's the way she practices as well. And then you have Brett Kavanaugh as well as Gorsuch recently on hiring practices. He lumped in, I think it was he lumped in like LGBTQ matters, as in sexuality and gender identity or sex identity with Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 or 1965. He lumped all that in, saying you can't discriminate. If you're an employer, you can't discriminate by LGBTQ and this and that. You know, that whole thing you can't discriminate by. So he has Gorsuch a couple times, is kind of strayed, and Kavanaugh is kind of like reminds me a little bit more like a Romneyite type of Republican. He strays sometimes too on a lot of issues. So you really don't even have a strong conservative majority, whereas the lefty majority on the Supreme Court, they always vote the same way. They never join the conservative side. That's what it seems like right now, because they're not in the business of being justice, or they're not in the business of abiding by the Constitution. They're more and more in the business of their own will and being what's it called? An activist, a judicial activist, and creating a super legislator. So Hamilton continues explaining the role of the judges, and I quote, if the opposition to the national government should arise from the disorderly conduct of refractory or seditious individuals, it could be overcome by the same means which are daily employed against the same evil under the state governments. The magistracy, being equally the ministers of the law of the land, from whatever source it might emanate, would doubtless be as ready to guard the national as the local regulations from the inroads of private licentiousness. End quote. Pretty much is just saying that they should be there to defend the Constitution. Whether it's, if you're a state judge, you should be there to defend the state Constitution. If you're a federal judge in a circuit court or in the Supreme Court, you should be there to defend the federal Constitution. Now, he continues to lay out different calamities that plague any nation, such as faction, discontent, paroxysm. Paroxysm is in like sudden, recurrent outbursts of emotion, pretty much just like really intense, tumultuous, chaotic things that would happen. Now, he characterized it, and I quote, they do not fall within any ordinary rules of calculation. When they happen, they commonly amount to revolutions and dismemberments of empire. No form of government can always either avoid or control them. It is in vain to hope to guard against events too mighty for human foresight or precaution, and it would be idle to object to a government because it could not perform impossibilities, end quote. So that's just him ending it, really wrapping it up, because he's saying these dissenters that they're throwing all these hypothetical situations out there, and there's really not going to be any system that is made by man that's going to be perfect, because man is in himself, he's not perfect. So any system no system is going to predict the future. It's not a completely perfect system, but that shouldn't be a reason to not ratify the Constitution, really. That's what he's getting at the very end there. So that's going to be it for this video. That will end it on that quote there. And please like, share, subscribe. Make sure you drop the mic on people. You let them know about the podcast. I finally figured out how to put it up on Facebook so it plays when people scroll through. So hopefully I can maybe get some new viewership through that. I still can't advertise, can't monetize really. I gotta wait until this all gets figured out in the litigation that's going on right now with the Trump team and everything. And I'm recording this video early. I will be covering a lot of stuff this weekend, and you'll have seen the weekend video before you see this one. So, please like, share, subscribe. Make sure you drop the mic, and that's it. I will see everybody on Wednesday.